Walpurgis was probably one of the most well-adapted parts of Tensura as a whole. But in the parts that the anime did decide to skip on, there were quite a few interesting moments that I think a lot of you would want to know about. Things like the Battle of Minds before Walpurgis had even started, or just some more information behind the functionality of certain unique and ultimate skills. Regardless of what that content may be though, I think the best way to end off this season of Tensura is by providing the most complete story I can for its climactic finale. So let's take a look at everything we missed from this Demon Lord Banquet of Walpurgis. Starting with Rimuru's initial analysis of all the guests, there was a bit more to each of them than what we were shown in the anime. Key details that went to highlight certain aspects of their strength, personality, or characteristics. For starters, Guy was manipulating his aura in a way that was intended to deceive those around him. What Analyze and Assess had first picked up was an aura of someone who was magically strong but not entirely in control. Kind of like a powerful yet inexperienced kid. Luckily for Rimuru though, the analytical skills of Raphael made him realize that this was nothing more than a ruse. A clever manipulation of his aura that not only hid his true self, but also delivered false information to the people around him, likely in hopes of getting them to underestimate him. So, despite Walpurgis just getting started, it was clear from Guy's actions alone that the battle was already underway. Sure, it may just be a battle of information right now, but hiding one's skills was a significant part in keeping the advantage. So long as the others weren't fully aware of what he was capable of, Rimuru could bluff or feign ineptness in order to get into his opponent's head, which was exactly what Guy was doing already. To expand on this a little bit more, what Guy was doing was essentially testing everyone. He was using his own manipulated aura to determine who was worthy and who wasn't. If someone only possessed the most basic form of Analyze and Assess, then they wouldn't be able to see past Guy's clever tactic, and that was enough to indicate that they wouldn't be worth dealing with in the first place. Now, if someone did actually have the ability to read him properly, then whatever glimpse they would have into the true depths of Guy's power would be more than enough to intimidate them into submission. It was a win-win situation in which Guy was in complete control over. That's why Rimuru was able to quickly understand that he was on a completely different level from him. Moving on to the holy giant Degrul, there was such a high concentration of magical energy emanating from his body that Rimuru couldn't say with certainty whether Veldora had more or not. It was as if he was looking into an infinite pool of it. Regardless of whether it was infinite or not though, what mattered most when it came to power was how that magical energy was used. So even if Degrul did possess a bunch of magicules, that alone wasn't enough to intimidate him like how Guy did. There isn't much to say about Valentine and his attendants, but the way his maid was manipulating her aura similarly to how Guy did was something that Rimuru knew no other Demon Lord would be able to pick up on unless they themselves possessed an ultimate skill. Then, with regards to Dino's conversation with Ramirez, we were given a bit more insight into her resurrection-based life cycle. Remember, her exposure to the immense auras of both dragon and demon had turned her into the continuously resurrecting fairy that she is now. So, since her latest resurrection was only 500 years ago, both her spirit and body had degenerated to the current state that we see in the anime. It would take at least another several centuries before she would mature into what she was before. In any case, that was the trio who made up the second generation of Demon Lords, a group who we know have been around for at least 1500 years or longer. As for the ones to come after, well, their level of power certainly didn't compare to any of the others. In fact, Rimuru was pretty confident that both Shion and Benimaru now possessed more magicules than even Frey did. You could even consider them to be at the same level as Valentine right now. But, as I said before, that quantity didn't really matter if you didn't know how to use it. So it's very possible that Frey could possess a bunch of hidden skills which would make her far more powerful than what Analyze and Assess would indicate. Now, prior to Clayman's arrival, there was a cutscene involving the relay of information from Benimaru to Rimuru. By using what's now known as a soul circuit, Rimuru's conscience was able to communicate with any monsters under his command. It wasn't as complex as the soul corridor he had with Veldora, but it was enough to be able to talk through. So, the gist of what Benimaru was telling Rimuru was pretty much the outcome of the battle. It was a completely one-sided victory in which Benimaru had displayed absolute dominance over. In a battle that lasted only an hour, not only were Clayman's forces wiped out with 1,000 killed and 3,000 wounded, but not a single person had been killed from Rimuru's side either. Of course, there was a bit more regarding how exactly Benimaru used Born Leader to beat Charybdis, but that's not really a topic relevant to Walpurgis. What is the fact that this was how Rimuru had gained a general idea of Clayman's story. Before we get to the beginning of that whole dispute though, there was an interesting realization that Rimuru had come to after using Analyze and Assess on the rest of the Demon Lords. When he had attempted to gauge the strength of Leon, he found that Leon simply wasn't analyzable at all. A phenomenon that went to indicate that he too possessed an ultimate skill. The instant Rimuru understood that this was what that phenomenon meant, that's when he'd also come to realize that Guy was doing more than simply testing everyone. Yes, he was screening the room for powerful individuals, but he was also feeding fake information to fend off everybody else's ultimate skills. Rather than give away the fact that he too had an ultimate skill by making himself completely unreadable, he instead decided to display a fake reading. That way, even if the other person did in fact possess an ultimate skill, they wouldn't know for sure whether Guy really had one since he wasn't doing anything to counter it. Unless that person possessed an ultimate skill as intuitive as Raphael, then there was no way they'd be able to see that Guy was using this fake aura to hide his own ultimate skill. It was an ingenious tactic that Rimuru now recognized Luminous was using for that same purpose as well, making her the 4th person on Rimuru's list of Demon Lords with ultimate skills. Now, since these were everyone's ace in the hole, it made sense that they would want to hide it. But the fact that Rimuru had toned down his aura to give away 0 information was really all the information that anybody with an ultimate skill would need. Just the action of blocking anybody else's analysis was more than enough to indicate that he was using an ultimate skill to do so. They may not be able to tell what type of ultimate skill it is he had, but there was no doubt that Guy was now aware of Rimuru's possession of one. Considering that Rimuru had 4 though, it really wasn't that big of a deal if he decided to show off one of them. There were actually numerous ways in which this could work to his favor. Really, it just depended on how Rimuru wanted to approach it. Moving on to the beginning of Walpurgis now, there wasn't much difference between the anime and the novels until the actual fighting began. So if we skip ahead to the moment when Milim first launched her attack, we see that even with thought acceleration slowing down 1 second to the equivalent of 277 hours, Rimuru still wasn't able to fully dodge her. Had he diverted his attention to think about a counter even once, then there was no doubt that he would have left himself open. A fatal mistake that he knew he couldn't afford to make right now. Yes, infinite regeneration could probably save him 1 or 2 times, but the amount of magicals required for that was way more than he was willing to spend. That's why he decided to mainly focus on dodging. Now, while all that was going on, there were a few interesting details left out from the scene with Beretta and Guy. You see, the fact that Guy had granted Beretta permission to call him by his name was actually indication that Beretta was strong enough to live up to his standards. It was a rare privilege that wasn't given out to just anyone. But even if Guy did recognize Beretta's power as acceptable, he was still ready to destroy her body right there had she fumbled with the question he was going to ask her next. If Beretta tried to avoid committing to serving only Ramirez, then Guy wouldn't have hesitated to kill her immediately, which was actually the outcome that he was expecting. When Beretta had gone to indicate otherwise though, Guy was surprised to see that she didn't conform to the more standard nature of a demon. I mean, most, if not all, demons want to be recognized by their master. So for Beretta to dictate that that wasn't actually the case, well, that just made her seem quite unusual in the eyes of Guy, leading him to ask the question about her lineage. Switching back to the fight now, Rimuru had actually gone ahead and run an analyze and assess on the Nine Heads White Monkey and Moon Rabbit. What he found was that both were intelligent enough to support the other in battle with their own special abilities. The Moon Rabbit would use some form of control gravity to weigh down its opponents, then the White Monkey would jump in to weaken their defenses. It was a combination of attacks that would eventually allow the Nine Head to jump in and finish their targets off. Fortunately for Ranga though, seeing through that basic attack pattern was far too easy for him. Him and his other commander-level Starwolves were more than capable of breaking down their opponent's teamwork. It did give him the upper hand in combat, but landing a finishing blow on any of the 3 magical beasts was proving to be quite difficult. If we fast forward to Valdora's sudden appearance now, there was one other reason for his arrival beyond that of wanting to finish his manga. As it turns out, Diablo had apparently returned from his subjugation mission in Varmus. So with him being back to protect Tempest, Valdora was now free to leave and meet up with Rimuru. We don't get any additional details other than that, but I think Varmus's brief transition of power is definitely worth mentioning, especially since Rimuru thought it would take anywhere from a few months to a year to finish. Now, during Shion's fight with Clayman, The reason she was able to resist his ultimate form of demon domination was mainly due to her skill Complete Memory. This was the power to record her memories directly into her astral body, making her a type of demi-spiritual lifeform who could think via her soul. So, even if her brain and body were completely destroyed, her now conscious soul with all her existing memories could simply be placed into a new physical body, thus letting her cheat death whenever she wanted. Not only that, but it also made it so that any type of attack on her spirit or mind would be completely neutralized. So she was pretty much immune to everything that Clayman specialized in. When it came to Clayman's second phase, Shion had made good use of her unique skill Master Chef to guarantee her victory. Her intrinsic skill Ogre Berserker did give her the force she needed, but it was the sub-skill's certain outcome and optimal action that made Clayman's weapons and defenses completely useless against her. While optimal action allowed her to read his flow of energy, certain outcome overwrote the very nature of the weapons he was holding, making them extremely easy to smash once they'd crossed paths with her Soul Eater sword. So, with the second phase pretty much over now, Milim's reveal came with a bit more insight into the steps that she had taken to fool Clayman. You see, to make herself seem influenced by the demon dominate magic was actually a lot harder than it was to outright negate it. And that's because magic like that would normally just bounce off of her. Not only that, but even if she did remove all her defensive barriers, she would still have to hold back all her natural force just so she wouldn't passively resist it instead. Only by holding back her own power and deactivating all her defenses was she finally able to make it seem like the demon dominate magic was working. Well, that plus all the bell peppers she'd been eating to help her maintain a straight face. Now, the third and final phase of this Clayman boss fight was pretty much exactly as we saw. But there was, however, a more detailed description behind how Rimuru was utilizing his thought acceleration here. And since I did mess up my explanation of it last video, I figured this would be a good scene to properly explain it with. So, for thought acceleration to increase his perception speed by a factor of 1,000,000, 1 second would now feel more like 277 hours for him. It was 11.5 days in which time would appear as if it was frozen. That said, this state of enhanced perception wasn't only used for Rimuru to take in his surroundings. He could also use it to mitigate the cast times of any spells that he wanted. Even if he was casting the most intricate spell ever conceived, the full day it would normally take to complete its setup would only take 1/10 of a second for Rimuru. Any spell he wanted could be cast multiple times and still seem as if it was released simultaneously. Another aspect of thought acceleration that wasn't really fully explained was exactly what it meant for Rimuru to extend this skill's ability over to Clayman. You see, by making Clayman perceive things 1,000,000 times faster as well, the few seconds of punches he received in battle were actually more like a several dozen days of agony and torture. For what felt like over a month, all Clayman could know and feel was absolute pain and terror. It was a gruesome experience that had even made his hair start to fall out. By the time it was over, all that was left was the horrified husk of what Clayman used to be. But yeah, that's pretty much it for everything we missed from Walpurgis. All the stuff to come after was essentially taken word for word from the novels. So there wasn't really much we missed other than a few interesting tactics and a couple extra details about some skills here and there. All in all, it was definitely one of the better adapted portions of the anime. But anyway, that's gonna wrap things up for my videos on Tensura. With the new season coming soon, the next series I'll be focusing on is Mushoku Tensei. So if you want to see videos similar to this for an anime like that, then be sure to subscribe with notifications turned on. I've also been streaming a lot more on Twitch, so if you want to come hang out and ask me questions, then feel free to follow at twitch.tv/Aninews_. Now, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!